Hello, everybody, and welcome to the FiveStack, a very special edition today as we're looking at the Supreme Court rulings that came down today and yesterday. Quite stunning rulings, and we have our guest, Ann P. Mitchell, the fabulous Ann P. Mitchell, Stanford Law, federal law author, and law professor. And she's also, of course, part of the TEST project here on Substack. And it's exciting to have you here, Ann, because this is a big day. Some good news and some bad news in the rulings.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like it's been a week in the past 2 days with everything that's been coming out. But yeah, absolutely. That's usually how it is, a mixed bag. A little something for everyone and taking away a little something from everyone.
And today's FiveStack is brought to you by groundnews.com. You can get 40% off right now if you go to groundnews.com/FiveStack. 40% off their Vantage plans. It's an incredible offer. They're only offering our FiveStack viewers. You can get access to news from across the political spectrum on Ground News every day. And it's compared to other broadcasts and other news agencies, gives you a real understanding of the entire political sphere. That's 40% off at groundnews.com/FiveStack. So in 48 hours, the Supreme Court closed its term and rewrote who runs the government. 6-3, again and again, is what we came up with. Time and time again, that number, it tells you how fixed this court really is. It handed Donald Trump the agencies, opened the money spigot, and let the state police, who counts as a girl. Then it drew exactly 2 lines it would not let him cross, and we'll let you know what those are, of course, as well. You probably already figured them out. So let's count them down. This is the 5 rulings, the smallest to the biggest, although none of them are small, really. Let's say the least significant to the most significant. And we will listen to some of the words of the justices as they handed down their rulings, and some of the dissents, which are also quite interesting. And, we've done this in a way that we can quantify the impact in order to really give you a real countdown of 5-1. So with each story, we'll provide you a ranking, if you will, of why we think this is the most significant or where it ranks in our top 5 countdown. And at number 5 is this one. For 3 years, Lindsay Hickox fought Idaho's law to try out for the Boise State women's track team. And a West Virginia middle schooler, Becky Pepper Jackson, fought to stay on her school squad. Now, on June 30th, the court ended both fights at once, upholding state bans on transgender girls in girls' and women's sports. This is going to be one of those rulings that will be universally cheered, actually, by a lot of people in suburbia or elsewhere who might just be thinking this trans thing has gone too far. But it's a very complicated ruling because, of course, we don't have enough science yet to really understand the whole transgender issue. And we've got a lot more research that needs to be done in order to get this. But what's your sense of what this ruling really was about? Kavanaugh wrote the ruling. What has he done with this ruling?
Well, it's interesting in as much as we know from a long line of cases about race that separate but equal is not really equal. And yet here in this decision, they say over and over, separate but equal is equal. And, that partly it's because of how Title 10 or Title 9 is worded. And partly it's because they are hammering again and again on biological sex. This entire ruling is underpinned by the distinction of biological sex versus gender identity. And it goes so far as to say, and here I'm quoting actually, let me just say this. This is what they say. The challenged West Virginia and Idaho laws make sex-based classifications in limiting female teams to biological females. Under the equal protection precedents, sex-based classifications are permissible only when the classification is substantially related to achieving an important government objective. And this court says that this sex-based classification is permissible because it does go to further an important government interest. And
What does that
again, a
mean?
quote.
An
Well,
important
hang on.
government interest.
A quote, and again, a quote, the state's sex-based classification limiting women's and girls' sports to biological females is substantially related to those interests, which are the purpose. Those interests are equally protecting both sexes. And again, this is where the court is saying that even though in other areas separate but equal is inherently unequal, here separate but equal is equal. But the other thing that they say is that the amendment, so this is part of an amendment to Title IX that they're analyzing here. And it says that that regulations, quote, shall include with respect to athletic activities reasonable provisions considering the nature of the particular sport. So as long as the school or organization can say, well, we have given you reasonable provisions, you still have a way to play. Again, it's separate, but it's equal. And this is there's one other thing.
Yeah, that's a very troubling, separate but equal. It's such a troubling term, of course, because they could go down the road here and apply that same idea that the protections really are for men and women, is what they're saying, right? That's basically
well. What they're saying is, and this is actually goes right to the heart of your question, is that when these laws were created, it was very clear that, sex meant biological sex. And of course, the court is supposed to look at the totality of what things meant and what the laws meant when the laws were passed. And so in this case, what they're saying and hanging part of their hat on is when the laws were passed, when Title IX was passed, and when the amendment was passed, sex meant biological sex, because we hadn't been having the conversations about gender identity, and being people who were trans were still basically hiding in the shadows. And so in part, that's what they're hanging, again, this opinion on is, the historical context and the letter of the law, which, that's what they're supposed to actually do. But it's funny how they only do that when it's to, their ideological advantage.
Well, also, they've when knowledge has advanced in certain areas, they've taken that into account. If it's scientific knowledge, they have in other instances taken it into account. But here, they're going back to sort of a very uninformed, really, era of what sex and gender is all about, and declaring that still valid, even though the world has moved on decades later into a different understanding. Certainly amongst younger generations, the idea of just this binary choice of man versus woman is not what exists in reality among so many school kids today, and generations that have grown up before them. So there's a real, the court's at odds with society in this ruling. And then there's the other factor here, which the way they've phrased that, if I'm listening to you correctly, it's about the protection of men and women, meaning everything else is not going to be protected going down the line. And let's say you could find a way to argue that gay men or gay women were also, outside of what would receive those protections, which is what they seem to be heading towards. We could be seeing an era of discrimination against gay men and gay women in much the same way as this trans decision sort of is the leading edge that cuts into that whole coalition of communities, which we now know as the LGBTQI whatever communities. But in reality, it all came from the gay rights movement. We just spent a few days with Gay Pride, and this is an indicator to me that this is going to be knocked down. Some of these other decisions related to gender equality and sex equality, or your gay marriage, or those kinds of rulings down the line, that this is certainly in the line of fire of the movement that is putting these cases into the Supreme Court.
I don't disagree, although I do think that those will have a harder uphill battle only in as much as this was truly the low-hanging fruit, because all they had to do was say biological sex. And, whereas that's not the case for, the gay rights and gay marriage and all that.
Well, when marriage was enacted, the first time, there was no gay marriage, and they would find their way to change that. How come they couldn't find their way to change this ruling? There's a lot of concern around the application of hormone changing medication to young kids and high school students and whatever, and there are legitimate concerns that some people have that need to be sorted out. But this really does seem like quite a broad conclusion, or at least decision here, that could ultimately affect many others as they continue, as it creates precedents for future SCOTUS rulings.
Absolutely. I agree in terms of other rulings and also lower court rulings that are having to do very specifically with gender identity and trans kids and trans adults.
The dissent, by the way, this is from Sotomayor, saying, in the end, to the court, the facts do not matter, even though the consequences are serious. The majority, she wrote, let states bar every transgender athlete, even if the facts show no competitive advantage, moving the goalposts to decide the constitutional question without the record to support it. This affects 27 states that already banned trans girls from girls' school sports. So we're giving it a score of 29 because it also impacts a couple of other states. Every public school and public university in those states, K-12 to onwards through the NCAA tournaments, all the squads that participate in that all have to now apply the ruling. And if I can get it up here, it says, that's the wrong one. You got a preview of what number one is. That's still coming up ahead. This is the one we're talking about. It's Little versus Hickox, although you point out to me before the show that it's been amalgamated into another
right.
decision.
It's West Virginia versus BJP.
Yeah. So 27 states with bans on how on the bans on transgender students in sports, and that will now be the law, and they'll be allowed to do that. There's no challenge to this coming, is there?
Well, I mean, not through here, but of course there can always be Congress can always enact a law. But I do want to point out that it actually affects all of the states. I know what you're saying is that 27 states are cheering right now, but just so that people aren't confused, this isn't a circuit court decision where it affects only a certain number of states within the circuit. This is the Supreme Court, so it is now the law of the land.
Interesting. All right, that's number 5 on the countdown today as we look at the 5 SCOTUS rulings that have come down as they end their season, as it were. The number 4 on the countdown is Trump versus Barbara. Again, the 6-3 ruling. This is Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts, writing the official ruling. And it's on day 1 of his second term that Trump signed an order stripping citizenship from babies born on U.S. soil to undocumented and temporary residents. 18 months later, the Chief Justice told him, no, the 14th Amendment means what it says. In the ruling, Roberts says children born in the United States to parents unlawfully or temporarily present are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and are citizens at birth under the 14th Amendment Citizenship Clause. That's pretty unambiguous. The 14th Amendment stands as it is. It's been like that since 1898, I think, and it's not going to change under Donald Trump.
Right. So this is both a big deal and not a big deal, in as much as we all knew that they were not going to strike down birthright citizenship. But what this really is about is striking down Trump's executive order, his birthright citizenship executive order. And that is really the big deal about this case, where he is basically being told, no, you can't do this, stop it. Again, as you said, the 14th Amendment is, and for people who may remember from, I don't know if it was taught in high school civics, but the 14th Amendment was a very direct result of the absolute stain on the Supreme Court's history of the case of Dred Scott, which was the case that basically said Black people, even if they were born here, are not citizens. I mean, which was just, even back then, immediately after the decision, people were just aghast. They were horrified at this outcome. And so the 14th Amendment was introduced and passed in direct response to what happened with Dred Scott. And I think it's important for people to take away from that yes, even with a Supreme Court decision, if it's wildly unpopular, there are ways to undo what the Supreme Court hath wrought. They are only one of the 3, I argue 4, branches of government, the 4th being we the people. But yeah, so this was a direct rebuke to Trump, and it's good to see that there are lines that even Trump can't cross with the Supreme Court. Although it's pretty shocking that there were still 3 dissents. And in fact, the dissents make up the bulk of this entire opinion. Thomas's dissent, which is the first dissent that you see in it, is 90 pages long.
Wow, that's a big dissent. Let me just stop covering you up there with that banner. This is a big decision, exactly because of what you're talking about, the limit on the president's executive power. At least he's beginning to see some limits there. This would have affected roughly 255,000 to 260,000 babies a year. That's how many people are born on U.S. soil to undocumented parents. Had their citizenship riding on this case. And so it's about 1 in 9 U.S. births. So this would have affected quite a huge number when you really understand it in that way. The order reached beyond just undocumented millions of children. It also includes the children of H-1B workers, international students, asylum seekers, and DACA recipients who would have been swept up in all of this. So just a large number of people. What did your mug say today? I missed your mug.
Oh, this one says, "It's me. Hi, I'm the lawyer. It's me."
She's the lawyer. That's
It's
why
a
we have her
takeoff
on.
Taylor Swift. But Zev, I would like to say that there are several people who I have seen in the comments who are wondering where Dean is. And so first of all, I apologize that you tuned in to see Dean and you got me instead. And I'm not sure where Dean is.
Dean is just taking the day off. He's not feeling too well. It is a holiday week here and in the United States, and we're both trying to find some time to take off. So you're just getting us piecemeal maybe for the next couple of days, but you'll get us every day, at least from the rest of the week on the FiveStack. So I should have mentioned that off the top. Sorry, Dean, and I'm sorry to all of you watching. You don't get Dean, but we get Anne, which is even,
one of the things that
even nicer.
Sorry. Yeah,
I wouldn't go to Gene as my lawyer.
One of the things that I do want to point out is that there actually is already one exception, very clear exception to the birthright citizenship case, and they talked about it in the Supreme Court decision, and that is children who are born on U.S. soil to foreign diplomats. And the reason for that is diplomats have diplomatic immunity from being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So in other words, even though they're here in our country, they are not subject to our jurisdiction. They're subject to the jurisdiction of their home countries. And so their children do not have U.S. citizenship. And the court was really careful to point that out. Because that is the exception that basically proves the rule.
That is interesting. So what we have here is another decision that, this is only one of very few decisions that have gone against Donald Trump and the White House. It affects 260,000 people a year, as we said. Maybe the number is even larger when you're counting their families, but we're just trying to find a way to quantify each of these to give you a proper countdown of what the most important is. So that's the story we're putting at number 4. Of course, if the decision had gone the other way, we might have had a very different opinion on where it stood in the countdown today. At number 3, this is the court opening the unlimited money buckets to all the parties, but still mostly it seems like the Republican Party is excited about this particular decision. So the ruling is NRSC versus FEC, and it's a 6-3 ruling again. Kavanaugh did the decision here. A Watergate-era cap on how much a party could spend hand in glove with its own candidate just fell. So the plaintiffs included a 2022 Senate candidate named J.D. Vance, who's now, of course, the vice president and will be running an election based on the very, very decision that included him as a plaintiff. So we shall see what that does to his campaign, as he's backed by all those, fabulously rich billionaires who are going to be backing him into the next election campaign. But the ruling says this: constitutional text, history, and precedent establish that the political party coordinated expenditure limits violate the First Amendment. Those limits, he wrote, necessarily abridge political parties' freedom of speech. Sounds like Citizen United, but in a slightly different setting. What's your take on this one?
Okay, so first of all, as you mentioned, one of the original plaintiffs was J.D. Vance back when he was a candidate. And that means that this lawsuit was filed during the Biden administration. And so you have this interesting interplay now where this administration, of course, was not contesting that they were on the same side as the plaintiffs, in other words. And so the court actually had to appoint an outside attorney to argue for the opposite side, for the side of keeping these regulations in place. So I never listened to that, but you have to wonder just how robust of a defense this court-appointed attorney who stepped into the shoes of the administration side, how good was the defense that they even mounted? I don't know, but I can guess that it would have been a much stronger argument if it had still been the Biden administration. But yes,
what an
it
interesting
does.
comment, especially considering what we're going to come to, which is that who gets to keep their jobs in the federal government is now a mandate of the president.
Okay, well, that's a different case.
Yeah, and it's a different case, but I mean, it's just interesting what you're pointing out about the attorney maybe not putting up as good a case if he's on the payroll of the DOJ.
Well, I don't know if he was, but in any event, basically what this case did was say, first of all, yes, as you said, the court came down on the side of saying that the First Amendment, it was violated by they're basically stifling speech and the flow of speech. And so up until now, there had been a cap on what an individual donor can donate directly to a candidate, and then another cap on what they can donate to a party. And the cap on what they can donate to a party is much higher, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this is not my area, but I think that the caps were like $3,500 for a direct contribution to a candidate, and at like $100-something thousand to a party. And
I mean, it's sort of I think much of this is the exact thing, but I think according to Justice Kagan, it was 7,000 directly currently to a single donor through the party. Now it jumps to $500,000 from a single donor. So it's a huge increase. They can go directly to
because originally that 100,000, hundreds of thousands cap was to go to the party, but the party was not allowed to work in concert with their candidate.
Right.
And now they can operate in lockstep with the candidate, effectively making it so that a very large donor who donates to the party is actually able to get that money funneled to their candidate of choice.
Can actually get the entire party working directly for them, basically, because they'll be on their payroll.
Essentially. And so, the reason that the Republicans are rejoicing way more than the Democrats is because typically Democrats are all about small grassroots donors. And, Republicans are the party of a massive amount of money behind the donors. They're really kind of like, oh, I hate to say it, but kind of the Epstein party. So that's the big deal. That's the big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal because you've got, right now, if you've got a candidate to running for the House, that representative works for themselves and for you, really, the people who voted them, because they're the people who fund them traditionally. What this ruling now does is allows the party to begin funneling money directly to the candidate, which means they'll be answerable more directly to the party and its funders, which we know could include anyone from Russia to who knows whom, could be really pulling the strings of what happens in your backyard, even though you think you're electing someone who's unanswerable to you. This legislation sort of changes all of that by giving, the power of money, if you will, control over these representatives, which we know is a very effective. What about the parallel to Citizens United? Or at least is this just another chapter in the sort of Citizens United saga, where we're now seeing, billionaires and corporations that are just now running party politics in America?
Well, I think it was Kavanaugh who said that it was a three-legged stool, and now this is the third leg that they've knocked out from under it, or something to that effect. And the thing is that what I hope will be the fallout from this, first of all, is it in time to really make an appreciable difference in the midterms? I don't really think it is. Maybe it is. I mean, maybe they've had the whole thing locked and loaded, just waiting for this, and in that case, maybe it will. But the Democrats also just really have to up their game in terms of, getting those really big ticket donors. This is a party, what's the word, agnostic ruling
Mm.
in
But
in theory,
mm,
but not right now in practice. So what
mm.
needs to happen is the Democrats really need to put it into practice for themselves as well.
If they can raise that kind of money, I mean, there's a lot more money on the right side of the ledger. That's just the way it's going to be. On the other hand, liberals and Democrats have the people on their side, and they for sure now have a serious majority waiting for them if the opinion polls are correct about where people believe this
Right.
president is taking America. So yeah, one side might have the money, the other side has the people. Let's see which really matters in American democracy. That's really the battle that will be shaping up. I do believe it's going to impact this next November election because a lot of this will find its way to TV networks, and a lot more advertising on the air. That's really what we're talking about here. And you could see Republican voices drowning out Democratic voices as they spend money on political advertising on TV networks and on local TV stations in some of those contentious markets. Let's take a look at where we put it in terms of impact. This is so it's 70 times is the factor we took in here as in terms of a donor's reach. So we go from 7,000 directly to $500,000 versus via the party. It's a huge increase in what people can spend in terms of supporting specific candidates in tricky districts or in contentious districts. That's a big one to watch for everybody. It's going to have an impact on the elections as we move into November. The number two, on the countdown. This is Lisa Cook and her seat on the Fed. So Trump moved to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, board member, I think it's not governor. The court said no, and in saying no, drew the second of its two lines. The same justices who handed the president nearly every other independent agency carved out, we'll tell you about in number one, but as we're going in reverse, carved out one exception, the central bank. So this is 5-4, not 6-3. One was closer, but still Lisa Cook gets to keep her seat as a board member.
No, she doesn't.
She doesn't. Okay,
That's
sorry.
not, I mean, that's not what it says. I mean, I know that's what all the headlines are saying. So I'm not surprised that that's what people think. But what this case really does, and this is why, it needs to be taken in tandem with the Slaughter case. The Slaughter case, which I know we're going to cover, but just very briefly, basically said that the chief executive can fire whoever he wants, and it doesn't need to be for cause. And yet in this case, it seems like the Supreme Court were saying, except for the Fed, he can't do that. But what this case really is about is Lisa Cook gets to present evidence as to why she should be able to keep her seat. So as some of you will probably remember, Bill Pulte claimed to have found evidence of Lisa Cook doing mortgage fraud. And that was the cause that President Trump claimed in order to try to fire her. And the Supreme Court found that, in fact, she had never had an opportunity to present her side of the case. She had never had an opportunity to say, this wasn't mortgage fraud, and here is why. And so actually the case was decided on those grounds and sent back down to the lower courts to give her that chance to defend her chair, basically. So, but they also did, you're absolutely right, they absolutely did go through an exhaustive history of the central bank and why the central bank has historically been treated differently as more of an independent agency, unlike in the Slaughter case where I can't remember, I think it was Kavanaugh who said basically it turns out that independent isn't so independent after all. But that is the distinction that was made, and I suspect that at this point, Trump probably wishes he had not stated a cause and he had tried to fire her without cause, because if he had done that, she would have gone the way of Rebecca Slaughter.
I mean, it does say here, according to the Supreme Court Chief Justice, that the court rejected letting the president remove a member of the Federal Reserve at any time for any reason, without any notice before and without any judicial checks after. The Fed was built to operate independently, Roberts wrote. Any change in that scheme must come to Congress, not the courts.
Right,
So,
and that's him saying that they took the opportunity to articulate the historic nature of the Fed being sort of isolated, and the structure that Congress created the Federal Reserve Act, which is a different law than all the other laws in the Slaughter case. So they took an opportunity to also call that out. But again, the actual decision was that the case goes back to the lower courts to give her an opportunity to be heard and to present her defense.
So it's not just so future Federal Reserve Board governors are allowed to be fired by the president. Is that what we're saying?
No, they didn't say that either.
Right. Okay.
They were very silent about that.
But does the Federal Reserve have a carve out as a Federal Reserve? Is what they're saying, or not?
Yes and no. They didn't come right out and say, well, they didn't come right out and say,
yeah,
the Federal Reserve, with the Federal Reserve, you have to always have cause. What they said was the Federal Reserve is an exception and there's a carve out, and Congress gave it this carve out, but they didn't actually, in fact, if I recall correctly.
You can only fire a Federal Reserve governor if you have cause, right? Isn't that the case?
I'm sorry, what?
You can only fire a Federal Reserve Board governor if they have a cause. They can't do it without cause.
That is the inference, but again, that is because it was in the Federal Reserve Act, which in the Slaughter case, it was also in a whole lot of acts that you had to do it for cause, and the court said, no, you don't. So they called out the difference with the Federal Reserve, but they did not specifically say that in all cases you must have cause.
Got it.
They alluded to it, but they didn't say anything very specific, at least not that I saw. Now,
I'll take the caveat. This is still a very big decision, and you might be wondering why it impacts you. It only impacts one person. I mean, this is the board of the Fed that sets interest rates, that sets really the economic direction of the economy. You know, if we talk about inflation, we talk about all those factors day in and day out in the news. This is the board that does that. If you're trying to manipulate currencies, if you're trying to manipulate affordability and spending habits of Americans heading into an election, the kind of thing you'd want is control over that Federal Reserve Board. So that is why this is a significant story, and why we're putting it with even though it impacts one person, it's our number 2 on the countdown, because it absolutely impacts every other American if they can have control of the Federal Reserve and the direction of monetary policy in America. Which brings us to the number 1 story on the countdown today, which is the fabulously important case. This is one that matters a lot. After 90 years, a president has never been able to fire members of the independent agencies just for disagreeing with him. We've had plenty of precedent here, including the unanimous 1935 ruling, Humphrey's executor, which said so. So on June 29th, yesterday, Roberts ended all of that. The case began when Trump fired Democratic FTC Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter and Alvaro Bedoya in 2025 with no cause, citing only Article 2. And the courts have agreed with him, which means that independent agencies now are directly controllable by the President of the United States if they are agencies created under his purview.
Yeah, that's right. And so Humphrey's executor, and to explain that kind of odd name of the case, was, as you said, a case that was decided in 1935 unanimously. And that was because FDR had fired William Humphreys. And he did so over a disagreement where the law at that time said you could only fire someone. It was an FTC law that you could only fire someone if, for cause. So basically for malfeasance or neglect or dereliction of duty. And FDR fired him because they disagreed on policy. And so it went to court. And before it got to the Supreme Court, Humphreys died. And so the executor of his estate stepped in to his position as the plaintiff to carry the case on. And that's why it's called Humphreys Executor. And again, that was a unanimous decision, and it has been that way. And the decision was that you had to have cause in order to fire someone within one of the federal agencies, especially the enumerated federal agencies, because there are several acts for different agencies that all had said you need cause. Roberts hated Humphreys. He was gunning for Humphreys ever since 2010, and he'd been chipping away at it, just in case you have any question as to his animus for the case of Humphreys Executor, he says right in the opinion yesterday, quote, "If anything more is left of Humphreys, the court overrules it." Like, Humphreys is dead. Let's all rejoice. He didn't say that part. The Humphreys is dead. Let's all rejoice was me. But the Humphreys, the court overrules it. If anything is left of it, he actually said that in the opinion.
Now, these are important agencies. These are agencies that regulate a large part of our broadcasting sphere, of our trade sector, of the stock markets, of the name me some others. What are the border? It was amongst them. What else can we think of? The National Labor Relations Board. All these boards are very, very important, and they have been running independently for at least 90 years now. And now to have this decision overturn, that means that the president has turned these agencies into just another arms of his executive branch. He just can willingly or at any point decide who sits on these boards and who doesn't, which means they've just become political instruments instead of what they were designed to be, which is independent. And
I mean, I can see I don't agree at all with this decision, but I can see the argument that, they're all within the executive branch. They were never designed to be wholly independent because the president gets to pick and choose who he puts at the head of each of those agencies. And that is, in fact, part of what, what the dissent or what the majority pointed out, which is that they said, Congress gets to have its say when the president nominates someone. They don't have to approve them. But once they do, and they are in place at these executive agencies, basically the argument went, it's ridiculous to force a president to continue to work with someone with whom he can't work. And so that's part of the reasoning for this decision, which again, it's not that I agree with it. I'm just explaining how they couched it. It was, that obviously I disagree with the decision. And, the comfort that I take, or the hope that I see in it, is that much like all of these wide sweeping decisions that have happened, even though it's a monumental shift, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be wholesale bloodletting. He's already done.
There might be, and and let's be clear about this president. He has done this from the start. He's been gutting the government of people who are opposing his political opinions at every branch possible. He's not going to suddenly change that, especially if he wins a majority in November. You can expect him to go as deep as he can into these independent agencies to acquire as much control as possible.
I guess my point, in a sort of a cynical Pollyannic way, is that he's already done it. This just means that he doesn't have to reverse it.
Right.
So that there may not be a huge number more, simply because it's already largely done. Again, that's the cynical hope part in me, which is always trying to find a little tiny bit of ray of hope in.
It also means that these these regulators who have been on these boards and independent agencies can't really sue the government as effectively as they could have before for any damages that they might have incurred for these losses because, of course, they no longer work for these agencies. They could normally have some sort of legal path, but now a lot less.
Well, actually, I mean, for the people who've been fired, they have a legal path, but the people who work for again, remember, these agencies are part of the executive branch. So while they're there, they can't really sue the administration because they are the administration.
I mean, the ones that were fired.
Right, once they're fired, they can, which is, I just want to take a quick side track to say that this is one of the things that I think that Trump and Miller and all the people behind him who have been orchestrating these massive, again, bloodletting, these exoduses from, for example, the DOJ is a really good example. Whether they have been let go or they have chosen to go because they just can't stand what's going on at the DOJ, there are now a massive number of really good lawyers who were with the DOJ, who know the ins and outs of the DOJ, and who are being snapped up by the law firms and by state agencies to now fight this administration. It's somewhat different in the in the executive branch. I'm sorry, in the executive agencies. But even now, we're seeing, for example, the climate scientists who ended up being let go or left because of the shuttering of most of the climate programs within the administration. They just went and they put up their own website so that they could
that's all well and good, and I'm
reporting.
glad they're doing that. But on the other hand, you've got this culmination of a project by the Federalist Society and others to seed the courts with these laws to basically, gut our government of people who might be opponents of right-wing views in their independent lives or their personal lives. And now we're seeing the Supreme Court uphold it. I mean, this is a political project that has been going on for a long time. This isn't really about Slaughter or anybody else. This is about politics and about controlling who works in government.
And as I said, Roberts started chipping away at Humphrey's executors in 2010. So this has been a long time coming. This isn't just Trump. Trump is basically the person at the figurehead that was the type of person they needed to bring these suits to bear. I'm sure that I really doubt that he had a thought in his head of his own, like, let's take down this case, because I'm sure he doesn't even know about it, or he wouldn't if someone else hadn't told him. So this is, 11, let's see. Oh, math is hard. This is like 15 years in the making, 2010. So, this is a 15-year, Roberts definitely had his eye on the prize. And of course, and I'm sure you know this, Zev, and most of the people here probably do, but just in case anyone doesn't, they shop for the perfect plaintiffs when you're doing a case. I mean, both sides do. Whatever, if you're going to be bringing a case that you hope is going to make law or undo law, you shop for the perfect plaintiff, you shop for the perfect forum, and you really are taking a long view. So I am sure that Roberts, like I said, he started chipping away at it in the first case in 2010. I forget the name of the case right now. But this is the culmination of that. This isn't something, out of the blue.
Right. Let's take a look here at why we're saying this is the number one ruling that came out of the Supreme Court in the last couple of days. And that's because it impacts 24 independent agencies. That's a lot of lost protection for Americans and a lot of lost protection for American government workers who might face, dismissal based on the president's whims. And that's, you might say is a bad day for democracy. It is. This is not a good day for democracy. However, the birthright was upheld. That is potentially a good day. We're looking at a vast shift in how power is executed in the American government. And this Supreme Court is still leaning towards the President of the United States with these decisions.
Hey, I just would like to bring, and this is, I don't think, unless you've seen it elsewhere, it's a surprise bonus case, and I'm not even going to talk about the case so much as just something the Supreme Court said, if I may. The case is Chatri versus United States, and it's really a procedural case, but it's basically the police, there was someone that they believed was involved in a bank robbery, and so as a result, they grabbed his phone or the data, and they asked Google, for his location data.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court said very clearly, I am quoting now, the Fourth Amendment protects individuals' reasonable expectation of privacy, and against government intrusion into that private sphere generally qualifies as a search. In other words, what they're saying is, and hang on, I had the
It's
other
got to be
one.
court mandated that if you.
Here we go. The police officers conducted a Fourth Amendment search when they acquired Chatry's location data from Google, because here's the really important part from the Supreme Court, from their lips, because an individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy in his cell phone location information.
That's a big
Now, I
deal.
don't know why this hasn't been reported all over the place, because that's actually a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal because, of course, we know that that's one of the plans of the Trump administration is to have us all geolocated at all times. If they can do that now, only if they have a search warrant, it sounds like. Is that what your understanding?
That's correct. That is correct.
So they can't be following Americans wherever they go using GPS, which they currently appear to be doing, if I'm not mistaken, in their big database that they built with Palantir. So that is a big significant thing. It also impacts voter patterns.
Yeah, and I haven't read the entire case, so that I don't know. I can't say for certain that it wholesale says that for everybody, for every instance, but it definitely says that there is a reasonable expectation of privacy, and that in order to subpoena location information data from, for example, Google, they need to have a warrant.
That is very interesting. Thank you for bringing that to the table here, because that is big in news for all Americans who value their privacy and who doesn't. There's one more story to tell you about, and it's a case coming up next year. And this is part of our 40% off ground news campaign here, where we are offering our viewers at FiveStack 40% off groundnews.com's incredible Vantage plans. It's a year-long plan which allows you to basically access their incredible database where they compare every story out there with different coverage from different parts of the spectrum. You get a view from the left, you get a view from the right, you get a view from the middle. You know exactly how each side is covering the story. And today's blind spot is all about this blind spots feature is the feature that they have, by the way, that shows you what you're missing on the other side. And the one thing that they're highlighting today is that the next fight in the Supreme Court is already here. The AR-15s fight. This is the blind spot, a story one side is barely covering. The headlines say what it is right at the top. The justices said that they will now hear challenges to the assault weapons bans in Connecticut and Cook County, Illinois. So that'll be next year's big docket, and it's a big one because that case is huge. It involves everybody, and it involves the ban on these AR-15 style rifles that have been used in so many of these shootings at schools and elsewhere.
I'm sure we know how that's going to go. I'm sure, and I wish it wouldn't, but so far I have not called all of the rulings, but the ones I've called have gone the way that I called them, and I'm pretty certain that this one will go, strike down the bans.
Yeah, it seems to be what this court will do.
Yeah. Also, a very interesting thing happened in the news today, which is that NPR reported, and I heard it with my own ears, that Justice Alito announced he was retiring, and then they had to retract it. So that's really interesting, because you wouldn't expect NPR to report something unless they had an actual credible source.
It should be Alito. I mean, they wouldn't want to get it from anybody else other than Alito.
Well, but then they retracted it, and I saw that they retracted it. So that's also true. So my guess is that he is at least talking about it, but it was embargoed, or that
that would have come. That's traditionally when they do it, right at the end of the season, when they've really got unless it's an emergency that's caused their resignation, then it happens at the end, because they can go away and not be bothered for the whole summer. And they can have their that announcement sort of echo in the media for a while without them having to react. But that would be a big deal, but not unexpected if he does resign. Just that gives Trump potentially another, life-term SCOTUS justice who can live beyond, the Trump era into many, many generations.
Yeah, but the thing is that I think even if he were to retire today, that Trump would not be able to nominate and push through his nomination before the midterms. And the midterms, I mean, Trump himself said if they lose the midterms, they've basically lost everything. So he's
Well, it's got another 2 years.
very worried. He's very worried about the midterms, and he should be. And we didn't even talk about the mail-in voting case yesterday, but very quickly, the Supreme Court yesterday gave Trump a huge blow when it basically said that ballots they can be counted after Election Day as long as they are postmarked by Election Day. And I just want to remind everybody, do not put your ballot in the mail. Take it to a drop box. And if you can, start ballot trains where you pick up other people who need rides to the ballot box. Don't take their ballots for them, because that could put you in violation of election law. But take people to the ballot box. Zev, did you know that there are counties where there is only one ballot box in the entire county? So people who have to rely on public transportation, for example, they can't even get to it. So start a ballot train if you can. Don't put your ballots in the mail. And
if this went the way of the against the president, why are you saying people should not use the mail-in ballots? Because you just think there's going to be more tomfoolery with the USPS? Yeah.
So Trump issued an executive order requiring that in order for there to be mail-in ballots, the states had to produce to the post office their voter rolls. And the USPS it's in the Federal Register right now. They have proposed a rule that would do just that, saying that if you're going to send mail-in ballots to your voters, you have to tell us who those voters are. You have to produce your voter rolls. And I am sure that will, I mean, that's already being challenged in court. I'm sure it will be struck down. But the point is, is what?
It's not there yet. It's not being struck down yet. It's obviously the intention.
And even if it is, I don't want to trust the USPS right now with anything, especially my ballot.
Yeah, and we have a story on narrative.org about that. You can read all about the USPS's sort of rule bending in order to try to get this federalized ballot initiative going, which is really a tricky thing for all of us who care about democracy. But the fight is not over. This is just the kind of expected setback we've been expecting from the Supreme Court. All these decisions, except maybe the birthright one, don't necessarily look great for people who are on the Democratic side of the political spectrum. But it doesn't mean the fight is over. It just means the fight needs to be even more intense, and we have to go and get it in November. There's a lot of work to be done wherever you are. We hope you're organizing and talking to your community and understanding how you can be involved, and whether you are just raising your voice by calling your congressperson or senator, or if you are participating in the elections themselves by supporting the candidates that you believe in. It's so important that everybody really participates in the election this year. It could be one of the most defining elections for democracy ever in the world. So thank you, Anne. Thanks for stepping in for Dean. I appreciate you joining us at such
always a pleasure.
Short notice. And it's great to have you at home here with us. And tell everybody about Notes from the Front, which is your Substack, where you provide a lot of very detailed and incredibly important source material for a lot of these decisions and legal cases that we discuss here on Narrative all the time.
Oh, I think you just did. You did a great job telling people, and thank you. But yeah, so my Substack is Notes from the Front, but it is not at notesfromthefront.substack. It is at AnnPMitchell.substack, because someone already had Notes from the Front. But it is basically, like Zev said, I report on the legal goings on between the courts and this administration, and I break it down in plain English. That's part of, I'm very fortunate that I was able to do that and am able to do that. That's my background as a law professor, teaching, second years. So I'm used to doing that. and it's free. It's absolutely free. There is a paid version that's only $5 a month. And with that, you also I include all the source documents, and you get access to our live broadcasts like this, and our private chat. But the important part is getting the information to you. So sign up for free, and, only upgrade if you want to. And thank you, Zev, for saying that.
Thank you, Anne. Thanks for the important work you're doing. And thanks to all of you at home for watching the FiveStack today. Dean will hopefully be back with me tomorrow as we count down the top 5 breaking news stories of the day. I should remind you, at narrative.org, we're covering the Amanda Ngaro story, where there is yet another sensational break that we're working on right now that'll come out either later this week or early next week. It's a big one, and we'll reveal all of that in the coming days. So please check out narrative.org, narrativ.org, where you can get all that. Plus this Substack live stream, which we have been providing to you. You can see that as well. If you missed the entire live show, please share it with everybody. It's so important that this word gets out, that people understand that there is an independent news outlet out there that's providing, reasonable, fair, fact-based, accurate news to people, because the main media organizations out there are not. So we really appreciate everyone's support. Thank you for being a free and paid subscriber to both my site and to Anne's site. And we thank you very much. We'll see you again tomorrow on the FiveStack. Yeah, go ahead.
And just quickly, I was going to say, for those of you of my followers who came from me, thank you so much. And please, if you aren't already subscribed to Zev's narrative, you really should be, because I think between the two of us, we cover nearly everything.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly everything Epstein. There's a lot of that in there. That's the show for today. Have a great 4th of July, or beginning of 4th. When I talk about it, it's not 4th of July. When is the holiday? The holidays?
It's this weekend.
Yeah,
the holiday weekend is this weekend.
Okay,
I think the 4th is Monday.
Yeah. It's Canada Day tomorrow. So I'm getting the two confused,
Hey, next year I'm going to have to celebrate both, because I'm getting my Canadian ancestry citizenship.
Oh, really? Congratulations. Welcome to Canada, I should say.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of Americans moving to Canada. Every time, the amount of Americans I bump into on a social basis or elsewhere here on a regular basis is quite something. A lot of Americans are coming to make Canada their home. Not necessarily good news for American democracy, but it's at least a place of refuge for some. And that is the FiveStack. We'll see you again tomorrow on the show. Bye-bye, everybody.